New videos every day. Psyche Truth. Life. Wisdom.
Your mental disorder, your perceived mental disorder, can become a catalyst for having an even better life.
I'm Psyche Truth correspondent. Thank you for watching The Truth Talks. I'm talking with Sean Blackwell today, founder of the channel Bipolar or Waking Up. Today we want to talk about recovery from mental illness. Sean, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we have spoken in a lot of videos, and in this video I want to address recovery from mental illness. Is it possible or not?
I would say not only is recovery possible, but complete healing and even what you might consider breakthrough is possible, so that your mental disorder, your perceived mental disorder, can become a catalyst for having an even better life.
Really? So you're proposing that not only could we recover from a so-called mental disorder, but we could actually come out on the other side in a better situation than we were when we started?
Yeah, well, that's what happened to me. That's why I'm here.
Okay, and thousands of people that you've now interacted with on your YouTube channel have a similar experience?
No, not thousands of people. Not thousands of people. Right now, it's, a rare few who have completely recovered and come out better on the other side. And the reason is the culture we live in, where as soon as something happens to you, you're shipped off to the psychiatric hospital. Mm-hmm. But it does happen. And one of the struggles that we've had up until very recently has been that there's been a lack of published scientific research on this that's been accepted in psychiatric journals. Very few studies have come to the surface. But a few scientific studies have really shifted the balance, we might say, mm-hmm. in the way psychiatry looks at things and in how the government bodies are starting to view schizophrenia. And I would say 2013 was a monumental year for a shift in the leadership of, for example, the National Institute of Mental Health.
Mm-hmm. Can you just elaborate on that?
Sure. I guess the story would go back to a writer named Robert Whitaker, who started looking into the relationship between medications and mental disorders. And I think originally Robert Whitaker's had the intention of going out and writing articles about how people with mental disorders were not taking their medications and sort of what bad people they were to be avoiding taking their medications because their medications are so good for them. Mm-hmm. Then he went out and he just found this sort of opposite story coming forward about sort of the long-term side effects of the medications and how difficult they make it for people. And he investigated even further and found that, in particular people had recovered completely and had these people who had recovered and even survived psychiatry, what they call the survivors movement, that these people were really starting to fight against psychiatry, and he found that they had a lot of reason to do so. Mm-hmm. All right. But still, where was the research? Well, in 2010, there was a professor from the University of Chicago, his name was Martin Harrow, and he released a 20-year study, okay, following people who had stayed on medications for their schizophrenia and people who had gone off their psychiatric drugs. And the thing was, generally psychiatrists do not see people who recover, because if you're going to recover, you need to leave the system. So the perception of the psychiatrist is that everybody needs these medications. And if you go off the medication and you relapse, you'll go back to the psychiatrist. So their view is that 100% of people need medications for life. But what Harrow did was he started following the people that went off. And what he discovered was that in his data, after 20 years, that people who went off their medications, particularly, I believe, within the first 5 years, 40% of them had completely recovered, had stopped relapsing by the 20-year mark. I think it was about 40% after 15 years, and then 15 to 20 years, the number was fairly consistent. With the group that had remained medicated, only 5% of them recovered completely. And honestly, if they're completely medicated, I don't know what that definition would be. Like, how do you say you've completely recovered? So it's a little vague for me. But, 40% recovered coming off meds from what's considered one of the worst mental disorders that we know of. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Certainly.
Okay, can I continue?
Yeah, go for it.
Some of the psychiatrists complained about this study. They said it was not randomized. Okay, this is apparently the gold standard for research, where the people who decide whether they're going to be medicated or not do not make the choice. The study makes the choice of which way they go. Okay, so a study was done in the Netherlands, a 7-year study. What they did was something interesting. They medicated everybody after their first psychosis, but then after 6 months, they took the medications off of one group and left the other group, the control group, medicated. What happened? The group that went off the meds, as psychiatry would expect, the group that went off the meds would relapse. And they relapsed at a higher rate than the people who remained medicated. But every time they relapsed, they would medicate these people and soon afterwards take them off the meds again. Relapse, take them off the meds. Relapse, take them off the meds. After 7 years, 40%, just like in Martin Harrow's study, 40% of the group who was repeatedly taken off the medications had completely recovered and stopped relapsing. Okay. Now, if you think about the video that we did on Kundalini, if you think about the energy model that I've talked about, why would people completely recover after 7 years, after multiple relapses? Because psychiatry says that if you relapse, it tends to get worse. Okay. Well, if you follow the psychiatric model, relapsing does get worse because you've got all these additional side effects related to the medications you're taking. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if you take people off the medications quickly after, there's not as many side effects, and the energies of the Kundalini process have more time to sort of come out. So every time you're relapsing, you're not going deeper into a mental illness, you're going deeper into your own healing. See? The perception in psychiatry is completely the opposite.
Right.
See, so if you look at it from this energetic perspective, you're releasing more of this subconscious energy. And so to me, that's my understanding, and that's the understanding I use when I helped my own nieces, when I've helped people in other countries now. And that seems to fit with this Wunderlich research. Mm-hmm. Now, that research could not be denied by psychiatry. They could say Martin Harrow's research was not randomized, but when Wunderlich's research came out, that was sort of the game. Mm-hmm. And it was so persuasive that Thomas Insel, the director of the National Institute of Mental Health, came forward in his blog, and we'll post the link on this video, mentioning the Harrow research and the Wunderlich research as reason that psychiatry needs to rethink what they're doing, needs to rethink the DSM-5, and that they've also started a new research program within the National Institute of Mental Health looking at how best to treat people in first break psychosis. Right? Mm-hmm. And first break psychosis today usually gets labeled as bipolar 1, but in research they often refer to it as schizophrenia. So it's a bit of a confusion there, but mm-hmm. that's sort of how it works out.
So you're actually saying that the head of the National Institute of Mental Health has kind of denounced psychiatry or denounced the DSM-5?
I think the correct term is thrown them under the bus.
I wouldn't want to mince words, of course.
Yeah, no, it was a huge blow to the American Psychiatric Association. The National Institute of Mental Health has come out publicly and said that they no longer support the continuation of the DSM-5, that it's not based on science, and that they're looking at other avenues to pursue the genetic origins of these disorders. I don't think there are any genetic origins, but that they're looking at other research techniques, and that they're also looking at now these new possibilities of looking at first break, for example. Mm-hmm. I think it's also worth mentioning that the conference that I'll be attending this week in Austin is sponsored by SAMHSA, okay? Substance Abuse and Mental Disorder Organization. I don't know what
I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for.
Somebody out there look for what SAMHSA actually stands for. But I think it's really great that a government body is taking alternatives to psychiatry seriously. Right. Because the people who are going to this conference aren't messing around. They want alternatives now.
Nice. And we certainly would be a proponent of alternatives to psychiatry, to psychiatric drugs as the only, as I mentioned in the last video, minimally, we should all have the choice. We should have a choice of going down the traditional route of taking psychiatric drugs and spending time in a mental institution. We should have a choice of another option for handling these experiences that we go through. So you're right. We've talked a lot about alternatives to psychiatry, to maybe the traditional treatment of mental health issues that people have.
And like I mentioned in the previous video, I think where we're going to end up in the short term is a sort of hybrid where hopefully we've got alternative methods and alternative clinics working in cooperation with psychiatry, so that if things get too serious or people are violent, we've got the psychiatric, security there, but that people who are sent to the psychiatric emergency aren't necessarily medicated right away. They might be able to get into a situation where they can be supported in a more holistic manner before they're pathologized.
Right.
And so I think there's room for a hybrid. There are psychiatrists out there that are starting to listen. There are. And there are certainly a lot of anti-psychiatry people and people like myself who are building alternatives.
Right. And, I think this is in a previous video that you mentioned that there was actually a study that looked at, in terms of the staff of a mental health institution. If you have a staff of PhD psychologists and psychiatrists, as composed, I think that in the study they had used, college students or something like that.
Right.
And I think in terms of looking at maybe this hybrid model or just ways to improve the current mental health system as it is, bringing in this element of compassion and empathy and support, so that rather than, as a person being taken into a mental hospital, you're not immediately treated as dysfunctional and as the treatment of people in these mental institutions, I was able to observe, is very impersonal, it's very judgmental. So I think just, bringing in an element of compassion and understanding would really go a long way in improving, even the traditional mental health treatments. And then, as you mentioned, kind of rather than immediately relying on psychiatric medications as pretty much the only avenue of treatment, and the most highly dependent on avenue of treatment, that there would be some other things that we could bring in as well to use, and not just immediately go to the drugs and depend on the drugs for the rest of the person's life.
And, I would say, especially in the 1960s, in the Artie Lang days, that's really where it started. What you had back then was, two polarized opposite type of people. You had these extremely cold, extremely arrogant psychiatrists who were sure they had the answer to everything. And on the other side, you just had these radical hippies who were, wanted to put LSD in the water to set the world free, like radical opposites. And those two ideas are never going to mesh. What is happening, and it's happening now, and I've talked to these people, we've got psychiatrists who are opening up, who are listening. Some, not a lot, but some are listening. And we've got sort of radical anti-psychiatry people who are ready to kind of approach things with a little bit more of a professional methodological, professional manner, we'll just say. Just to
kind of find a middle ground.
Yeah. And then you can start to have a dialogue, because as long as you're sort of pointing the finger at the other guy and saying, you don't know what you're talking about, this isn't going to work, and blah, blah, blah. If you got that dialogue happening, there's no communication,
Right.
But we're at a place now where, conversations are starting to happen. And I think we're going to see some pretty surprising shifts in the next 5 years. I think we'll be able to look back 5 years from now and go, wow, that was fast.
I sure hope so.
Because it's not rocket science.
Right.
It's not that complicated.
Right.
It looks complicated, but it's really not.
And you're right. We do kind of need to find that middle ground, because we're not talking about, who needs to be right or who needs to be wrong. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about people's happiness, people's emotions, people's ability to lead a happy life or not. And when we're talking about something which is arguably the most important thing on the entire planet, our lives, our emotions, our happiness, we need to have solutions. We need to be solution oriented. And you're right. It's not about pointing the finger. It's about finding a solution that's really going to work for people. In a productive and safe way. Well, Sean, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely. We look forward to interviewing you again soon.
I hope to come back.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I do hope that you will give it a thumbs up and leave your comment. Let us know what you think about the topics that we've discussed today. Please be sure to subscribe to the Psyche Truth channel so you can see all of our future videos. We're dedicated to helping you take control of your health and your happiness, and I do look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for watching.